She reached for the water pitcher, her sleeve slipping just enough for him to see them, angry, circular burn marks crawling up her dark forearm, then bruises all over her face. She froze the second she realized he'd seen. "Kitchen accident," she whispered, voice trembling. But Tony Gunner didn't become the most feared man in New York by believing in accidents. The fear in her eyes told him everything. Someone had hurt her, and whoever it was, they'd just made a very big mistake. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Please subscribe if you haven't. And let me know where you are watching from. Now let's continue. 7:15 a.m. Manhattan. In the quiet hum of the penthouse, the city below hadn't yet caught up to Tony Gunner's rhythm. He was already seated at the long glass table, reviewing a stack of documents while the first rays of sunlight broke through the skyline. To anyone else, it was just another Tuesday. To Tony, it was another day to stay 10 steps ahead of everyone, friends, rivals, and enemies alike. He didn't miss details. Ever. The way a hand twitched before a lie, the hesitation in a voice before betrayal, the shift in a heartbeat that signaled fear. He built his empire on reading people like balance sheets, calculated, precise, and unforgiving. That's why, when Amber Robin entered with his breakfast tray, something immediately felt off. She'd worked for him 8 months, never late, never careless, never with a single hair out of place. But this morning, her movements were stiff, measured. The kind of stiffness that came from pain, not caution. Her uniform sleeves were pulled down too far despite the warm air, the fabric bunched tightly around her wrists. She avoided eye contact, murmuring a soft, "Good morning, Mr. Gunner," as she reached to pour his water. The sleeve slid back just a few inches. That was all it took. Tony saw the marks, small, circular burns in different stages of healing, patterned like someone had pressed cigarettes against her skin. His eyes narrowed. She noticed, flinching as if his gaze alone burned. "Amber," he said, setting his glass down. His voice was calm, low, dangerously so. "Who did that to you?" Her eyes darted away. "It's nothing, sir. Just a kitchen accident." Tony leaned back slightly, studying her the way a hunter studies a trail. "You think I can't tell the difference between an accident and cruelty?" Her lip trembled, her fingers tightening around the handle of the tray. "I really should get back to work." "Sit." The word wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind that didn't invite argument. Amber froze, then slowly sank into the nearest chair. She kept her eyes on the floor, her body small, guarded. The air between them tightened. He watched her for a long moment, silent. There were rules in his world, lines people didn't cross. He could tolerate betrayal, deception, even greed. But fear like this? Fear that deep? It only came from monsters. And Tony Gunner had made a career out of dealing with monsters. He glanced once more at the burns, then at the quiet maid sitting across from him. "You work in my home," he said softly. "That means you're under my protection. Whoever did this, they just invited me into their world." Amber's head snapped up, eyes wide with something between shock and disbelief. Tony reached for his phone. His expression didn't change, but his tone dropped a shade colder. "Vincent. Get to my office. Now. We have a problem." As he ended the call, the camera of the mind's eye would pan slowly out from the penthouse window, New York stretching beneath him, unaware that its most powerful man had just declared war on whoever dared touch his maid. Transition to backstory. That morning was supposed to be routine, a quiet breakfast before a day of meetings. Instead, it became the moment everything changed, the first crack in a web of corruption that reached far beyond one woman's pain. What Tony didn't yet know was that those scars on Amber's arm weren't just the result of cruelty, they were a warning. And by the time he uncovered the truth, the entire country would be watching. The moment Tony hung up the phone, the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted. The quiet hum of the city below faded into the background, replaced by the slow, deliberate tick of the antique clock on the wall. He didn't move for a full minute, eyes fixed on the doorway where Amber had stood moments ago. Her footsteps still echoed faintly in his mind, hurried, uneven, as if she were running from something invisible. Tony had seen that kind of fear before. Not in civilians, but in people who'd been cornered, who'd learned that sometimes the law doesn't protect you, it betrays you. He leaned back, folding his hands together. "Kitchen accident," she'd said. "Bullshit." The elevator chimed. Vincent Corso stepped out, his presence as familiar as it was grounding. Mid-50s, sharp gray suit, silver streak in his hair. Tony's consigliere, his voice of reason, and, when necessary, the only man who could tell him no without bleeding for it. "Morning, boss," Vincent said, shutting the elevator gate behind him. "You sounded urgent." Tony didn't look up right away. He just gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Vincent's brow furrowed as he took his seat. That tone usually means someone's about to have a bad day. Tony slid his gaze toward him, calm but loaded. "Amber. My maid." Vincent blinked. "The quiet one? Always early, polite. What about her?" Tony's jaw tightened. "She's hurt. Burns on her arm. Fresh. Deliberate." Vincent exhaled slowly. And she lied about it." Vincent rubbed his temples. "Tony, look, you know I respect your instincts, but getting involved in domestic stuff, that's not our lane. You start mixing with civilian trouble, suddenly you're in the papers for the wrong reasons." Tony's stare sharpened. "You think I care about headlines?" "I think you care about exposure," Vincent countered, tone firm but cautious. "There's a difference between protecting your people and playing hero. We've got other fires to put out." "She's my employee," Tony interrupted quietly, but his voice carried enough weight to silence the room. "She works in my home. That makes her my responsibility. You know how this goes, Vince. Nobody touches what's mine." Vincent sighed, settling back in the chair. "So what do you want to do?" Tony finally looked up, eyes hard as steel. "Find out who hurt her." 10 minutes later, the line to Marco DeLuca was open. Marco, head of security, had been with Tony since their days running protection for politicians in Queens. A man of few words and fewer expressions, but when he handled a job, it stayed handled. "Marco," Tony said. "Morning, boss. I've got a name for you. Amber Robin. She's been my maid for 8 months. I want everything on her, family, friends, employment, where she lives, anyone she's been in contact with recently." There was a pause. "You think she's a threat?" "No," Tony said. "She's in danger." Marco's tone shifted instantly. "Understood. How deep do you want me to dig?" "Deep enough that she never knows we looked. And Marco, be discreet. If someone's already watching her, I don't want to spook them. I just want to know who's pulling the strings." "Got it. Give me a few hours." The call ended. Tony set the phone down, his expression unreadable. Vincent stood by the window now, looking out at the skyline. "You realize what this looks like, right? Big bad Tony Gunner getting emotional over a maid." Tony smirked faintly. "I don't get emotional." Vincent turned. "You sure about that?" "Because I've seen that look before. The one that comes right before someone vanishes." Tony didn't deny it. "Then they better pray I don't find out who they are." By mid-morning, Tony was in the kitchen. The penthouse was still. Amber had left early, citing an errand. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly housekeeper who'd worked for him nearly 15 years, was folding linens near the sink. She froze when Tony stepped in. "Mr. Gunner," she greeted carefully. "Can I help you with something?" Tony leaned against the counter, his gaze steady. "Tell me about Amber." Her hands hesitated over the linens. Amber. She's a good girl, sir. Quiet. Hard-working. Never complain. He watched her closely. Never complain. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. Well, she glanced toward the doorway, lowering her voice. She's been off lately. Distracted. Takes phone calls during her breaks, always steps away where no one can hear. Once, I found her crying in the supply closet. She said it was just exhaustion, but you didn't believe her, Tony finished. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. No, sir. I didn't. Tony nodded slowly, eyes narrowing in thought. Did she ever mention anyone? Family? Trouble? Only her brother. Marcus, I think. Said he's been in the hospital. I don't know why. She never talks much about herself. He studied her face, reading the sincerity there. You didn't see anyone waiting for her outside the building recently? Anyone she seemed afraid of? Mrs. Patterson frowned. Now that you mention it, twice, I saw her at the bus stop. Just standing there, looking around like she was being followed. The poor thing looked terrified. Tony's expression hardened, and Mrs. Patterson instinctively stepped back. You think someone's hurting her, sir? I know someone is, Tony said quietly. But not for long. By early afternoon, Marco called back. Boss, I've got your file. Tony was in his study, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, sunlight slicing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Talk to me. Amber Robin. 32. Born and raised in Brooklyn. Lives in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Bed-Stuy, same house she grew up in. The family used to own Robin's soul food restaurant. Been around 20 years. Burned down 3 weeks ago. Tony's head snapped up. Burned down. Fire marshal called it accidental, Marco continued, but my contact says accelerant residue was found at the scene. Doesn't sound accidental to me. Tony's fingers drummed on the desk. Go on. She's got one sibling, younger brother, Marcus Robin, 28. He's in the hospital. Third-degree burns over 30% of his body. Medical bills piling up. Amber's been working 3 jobs, here, cleaning offices downtown, and overnight shifts at a diner. Vincent, sitting opposite him, let out a low whistle. Jesus. Marco kept going. 3 police reports filed in the past month. All dismissed as unfounded or insufficient evidence. Same precinct each time. Tony's eyes darkened. Who's the precinct captain? Thomas Brennan, Marco said after a pause. Longtime NYPD. Clean record, at least on paper. On paper, Tony repeated. He already knew what that meant, connections, favors, and rot hidden under the badge. Marco continued, Amber's been in and out of Brooklyn Methodist. Mostly visiting her brother. Last week, she left work early 2 nights in a row. I checked footage, she looked nervous. Kept glancing over her shoulder. Once, she stopped halfway down the street and waited 20 minutes before getting on a bus. Tony sat back in silence. On his desk, Marco's file sat open. The top page held a clipped newspaper article. Bed-Stuy restaurant fire ruled accidental, no evidence of foul play. Below it, a photo, charred remains of a small building, smoke still rising from the ruins. In the corner, a hand-painted sign barely visible, Robin's Soul Food. Tony studied it for a long time. Then his eyes moved to the next page, a hospital report listing Marcus Robin's injuries. Third-degree burns. Severe lung damage. Condition, critical. Vincent finally broke the silence. This looks bad. Real bad. Tony didn't respond. He was staring at the photos, not at the destruction, but at the pattern. You see the shape of those burn marks on her arm, Vincent nodded slowly. They weren't random, Tony said. They were warnings. Vincent frowned. Warnings from who? Tony's gaze flicked toward the city skyline. That's what we're going to find out. 2 hours later, Tony's office looked like a war room. Files spread across the desk. Marco standing by with a tablet showing surveillance stills. Vincent pacing, muttering under his breath about political landmines. Tony's focus never wavered. He was connecting dots in silence. This isn't some junkie attack, he said finally. Too organized. The fire, the police ignoring her, the insurance cancellation, it's all coordinated. Someone's pressuring her family. Vincent stopped pacing. To what end? To make them leave, Tony said. Bed-Stewie's been gentrifying for years. Property values are up. You start a few fires, scare the locals out, you get cheap land and no one asks questions. Vincent cursed under his breath. You think she's caught in a racket? Tony's jaw flexed. No. I think she's caught in a war she doesn't know exists. He turned to Marco. Keep digging. Find out who bought the lot where the restaurant stood. Follow the money, shell companies, trusts, whatever you find. On it. Tony's phone buzzed. A message from Sofia Reyes, his digital forensics specialist. Got access to public footage near Brooklyn Methodist. You'll want to see this. He clicked the attachment. Grainy footage appeared, Amber, exiting the hospital, clutching her bag tightly. 2 men leaned against a car across the street. She didn't see them at first. When she did, her pace quickened. One of them stepped forward. The other followed. Then the video cut out. Tony's hand clenched around the phone. Vincent looked over his shoulder, expression grim. That's not a coincidence. No, Tony said softly. It's a message. He rose, walking to the window. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, gleaming, indifferent. They think she's alone. That nobody will come for her. He turned, meeting Vincent's eyes. They're wrong. By dusk, the penthouse was silent again. The skyline glowed amber and gold, the city's noise muted by the height. Tony sat alone at his desk, the last rays of sun cutting across his face. The file on amber lay open in front of him. Family photos, her smiling beside her brother, her parents outside the restaurant, the hand-painted sign behind them. They looked proud. Whole. Before it all went up in smoke. He closed the folder slowly, his reflection catching in the glass window behind it. Vincent re-entered quietly. Marco's tracing the property records. Early signs point to a shell company, Ashford Holdings. The name ring a bell? Tony looked up, and something in his expression shifted. Ashford? Vincent nodded. Yeah. Councilman Richard Ashford. Real estate guy turned politician. Big on urban renewal programs. Could just be coincidence, but... Tony cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. There are no coincidences in this city. Not when people are burning. Vincent hesitated. You really want to go after a councilman? Tony's eyes hardened. If he's behind this, he's not a councilman. He's a criminal. And I don't let criminals touch my people. He stood, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his lips, not of humor, but of intent. Tomorrow morning, I'm talking to Amber again. This time, she's not leaving until I know everything. Here there, are you still following? Please subscribe. And comment what you think would be his next move. Tony's resolve had crystallized into something cold, methodical, and unstoppable. He'd seen injustice before, but this wasn't business. This was personal. And for the first time in years, New York's most feared man was about to go hunting, not for power, but for truth. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed against the windows like a warning. Tony was up before sunrise. He'd spent most of the night replaying every detail, Amber's trembling hands, her quick excuses, the burns shaped like someone's cruelty rather than an accident. He'd seen enough to know the difference between fear and shame. He poured himself a black coffee and stood by the window overlooking Manhattan. The city looked calm from this high up, too calm. Somewhere below, people like Amber were being broken by systems designed to protect people like Ashford. At precisely 7, he heard soft footsteps in the hall. She was punctual as always, though he noticed the way her shadow paused before she stepped fully into the kitchen. She moved carefully, as if she expected the ground itself to give way beneath her. Tony set his mug down. "Amber," he said evenly. She jumped slightly at the sound of his voice, her eyes wide before she managed a polite, "Good morning, Mr. Gunner." "Sit down," he said. "My office." Her hands froze on the handle of the coffee pot. "Sir." Tony didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This isn't a request," he said quietly. Then, softer, "but it's not a threat either. I just want to talk." For a moment, she looked ready to run. Then she exhaled, shoulders slumping. "Yes, sir." She followed him down the hall into the wide expanse of his office, a room lined with dark oak shelves and glass that framed the skyline. He gestured to the seat across from his desk, the same chair Vincent had occupied the night before. Amber sat on the edge, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tony watched her in silence for a moment, letting the quiet stretch between them until the tension became unbearable. Then he spoke. "Your last name's Robin," he said. She blinked, startled. "Yes, sir. Your family owned a restaurant in Bed-Stuy. Robin's Soul Food." Her head shot up, confusion and fear flashing in her eyes. "How do you?" "3 weeks ago, it burned down," Tony continued, his tone calm, deliberate. "Your brother, Marcus, was inside. He's still in the hospital. You filed 3 police reports. All dismissed. The fire marshal called it an accident, but there were accelerants at the scene. Your insurance company canceled your policy a week later. And now, you're working 3 jobs to pay medical bills." Amber's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled in her lap. Tony leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "So before you tell me another story about a kitchen accident, let's try the truth instead." She sat frozen, like a deer staring down headlights. Then her eyes filled with tears, silent, unguarded. She pressed her palms to her face, her voice breaking. I didn't want you to know. I just needed to work. To keep going." Tony said nothing. He waited. Finally, the words poured out of her in a rush. "My parents started the restaurant when I was a kid," she began. "Back when Bed-Stuy was still our neighborhood, when people knew each other, when we looked out for one another. 20 years we kept it running. My mama's recipes, my daddy's hands. Marcus and I grew up there." She paused, voice quivering. "But then the condos came. The fancy stores, the people with dogs that cost more than a month's rent. They started calling it revitalization, but for us, it was slow death. Every week, another black family sold their home. Another small business disappeared. We held on as long as we could.